Welcome to It's All Geek to Me, a podcast where two friends experience popular nerdy franchises for the first time. Today, we are doing a special bonus episode between seasons. I'm your host, Leah, and together with my co-host, Kelly, we will be watching The Princess Bride for the very first time. So let's dive in.
And we are back. So we just finished the movie, so we watched the second half.
We did.
I have a lot of thoughts.
I have so many thoughts, too.
So many thoughts. Okay, I'll start us off. So we left off where the kid interrupted because he didn't like the kissing. He wants to know more about the fire swamp. So we cut back to the story, and Wes and Buttercup, I'm calling him Wes now, too. Wes and Buttercup are running along the ravine, and he's like, ha, your pig fiance is too late. And then he's like, we'll be safe in the fire swamp. And she's like, no, we won't. And he's like, oh, come on, you're just saying that because nobody's ever survived in there.
Yeah.
So
at
funny. First I wrote down, this swamp does not look fiery. It looks like just a creepy old forest, but then there is what they call later a fire spurt that pops out. And Wesley's kind of being a jerk right now.
Yeah, I didn't like him in this scene at all. I felt like he was being so pompous.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't like him, period.
I agree.
I have made that decision.
I'll tell you who my favorite character is, but I'll tell you at the end.
Yeah, I think we have the same favorite character again.
Probably.
So we seem to have similar taste in characters.
But no, in the end, I was like, he's way too full of himself and pompous.
Yeah, I was just not a fan of him. Mm-hmm. People are probably angry about that, but I'm sorry. He's just not a good guy, and we'll get into why. Aside from, what he's done before. But anyway, so yeah, he's just like, oh, it's not so bad in here. And she's just giving him a look like, why did I choose you? Which honestly, same. And he's like, what?
Why?
Just besides, obviously, like everything, the trees are kind of nice. He's actually like, the trees are quite lovely, which is such a pompous thing to say. Mm-hmm. Then the little fire spurt comes up. Buttercup's dress gets caught and he like helps stomp it out. And he's like, there, that wasn't so bad, was it? Which is so annoying. And then actually, I did make a note at one point during the second half of this movie that I finally realized there's just something about his voice and his cadence that I didn't like. And I realized it reminds me, did you ever watch really old films or like radio shows where they're like, well now, I think we've gotten ourselves a little bit of a problem here.
Yeah, he's definitely like that. I know what you're saying.
He's like not talking like he's in this day and age. He's talking like he's in the 1920s. And I'm just not a fan of that.
Yeah.
So then he's like, oh, and I've got my ship, the Revenge. And, as you know, I'm Dread Pirate Roberts. And she's like, how does that make sense? He's been going around for 20 years and you only left 5 years ago. And then he explains to her that basically the story he told her before she knew who he was actually the truth. So he did beg Dread Pirate Roberts for his life. And I don't understand exactly what happened, but basically he's like, all right, I'll let you stay for the night and work for me, and I'll probably kill you in the morning. And then he said that went on for 3 years. And then kind of a funny thing happened. They became friends. And one night, Dread Pirate Roberts admits to him, I'm actually not Dread Pirate Roberts. That's just a name that was passed down to me. And the last Dread Pirate Roberts actually told me that he wasn't Dread Pirate Roberts. It was passed down to him.
Did you catch what this particular Dread Pirate Roberts' name was, though?
I did. His name was Ryan, which is my partner's name. As Ryan does kind of strike me as a Dread Pirates Roberts kind of guy.
I feel it.
So it makes sense. But yeah, so he's just saying like, it's not a person. It's basically just a name that people inherit.
And they inherit the ship when the other guy wants to retire.
When it's time, I'll just pick another pirate and then he can become Dread Pirate Roberts. And then our 90s fear came alive because immediately Buttercup gets swallowed by quicksand.
Very quickly.
I actually wrote down, is this why every millennial is scared of quicksand?
Well, you didn't play Super Mario 64, did you?
I didn't play 64, no.
Okay, well, there's like a bunch of levels where you just get trapped in quicksand. So that's what I think about with quicksand.
Well, now we've got that fear unlocked. So yeah, then immediately Westley gets a rope and he jumps in after her. And then this giant rat walks by. I mean, he's supposed to be gross, and I did write down giant gross rat, but he was kind of cute. Like it was like it was just like that cute furry bad guy of like older movies.
If you say
and
so.
It was cute. Okay, you know what? You like Smeagol, so I'm allowed to like this rat.
Smeagol's at least got a personality.
This rat had a personality. Don't worry, he comes back. So finally, Wes and Buttercup get out of the quicksand. They're coughing and gasping, and the rat comes back and looks at Westley, and he's looking at the rat. So I don't understand why later he kind of forgets that the rats exist.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, so Buttercup is very morose, and she's like, we may as well just die, which I get, because like I've said in the previous season, I would certainly just drop instead of fighting for my life. But he's like, well, so there's 3 terrors of the fire swamp, right? So there's the fire spurts, which we already figured out how to avoid, because basically they make like a little bubbling sound, and then they spurt up. So they know how to avoid that. And then he's like, okay, number 2, lightning sand, which is quicksand, but I guess it's quick as lightning. And he's like, now we already know to look out for that. And then she's like, what about RUS? And he's like, rodents of unusual size? I don't think they exist. And then immediately gets mauled by one.
Yeah, that was so weird because he looked at it. Like he saw it.
They were making eye contact with each other while he was hugging Buttercup. He's going back and forth with this rodent trying to like kill him and bite onto him. It does bite his shoulder, I guess. And so they're fighting, and then he hears the gurgling sound. So he rolls over with the rat until they are at a fire spurt, and it lights the rats back on fire. And then he releases Wes. He's whimpering and stuff, and then Westley stabs him. So they survived. They made it out, and guess who meets them at the end of the fire swamp?
Prince Humperdinck.
Humperdinck. So then what happens?
So yeah, they make it through the swamp, but the prince immediately meets them on the other side and tells them that they have to surrender. And Wes is kind of coming back at him like that he's not going to surrender, but Buttercup is noticing that they're completely surrounded. There are archers all around them. So there's really no way that he's going to fight his way out of this. So she decides to speak up, and she says, if we surrender and I come with you, I need to make sure that he is going to be okay. He is a pirate. Just bring him back to his ship. And the prince is like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, which immediately I knew he was not going to do that. He whispers to his right hand and he says, throw him in the pit of despair, to which I wrote torture. Time for the torture section.
You were right.
Yep, I knew that torture was coming. So Buttercup, I think, is a little daft here to believe that the prince was just gonna like let him go. So that was a little interesting. So Buttercup goes off with Prince Humperdinck, and Westley stays behind with the hand, who we don't know his name yet, but it's Rugen.
But I do love that you're calling him the hand, because he ends up being the six-fingered man.
Yes. So Westley is standing there. He's looking up at Rugen on the horse, and he says, you're going to take me to my ship? And the guy says, yeah. And then Wesley's like, I know you're lying to me. And then he looks at his hand and he sees that he has 6 fingers, and he calls him out and he says, you have 6 fingers on your hand. And so now Wesley knows that this is the man that Inigo is looking for, which is exciting that Inigo could find him.
I was thinking Leah is right.
I was right. So the next scene that we see, Wes wakes up and his wounds are being treated by some very interesting, creepy looking man. He looks like, you know who he kind of looks like? That actor who plays Peter Pettigrew in Harry Potter.
Yeah, he was giving off that vibe.
Yeah, like I feel like that guy always plays like these, like, I'm pretty sure he was in Sweeney Todd and he played some like creepy guy too.
Oh yeah, he was like the right-hand guy for Snape in Sweeney Todd.
Alan Rickman's right hand in Sweeney Todd. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Which I have to admit to you, I thought it was a woman at first.
I kind of did as well, but you know what? We stan a non-binary queen, so who knows?
I'm fine with the androgyny here, yeah.
The gender is unimportant.
It's something that I historically seem to be pretty bad at identifying, so I just like to wait for identifiers.
Yeah.
Which is fun.
But anyway, Westley wakes up and asks the person, where am I? And they say, you are in the pit of despair.
I like that you're giving them they, them pronouns.
Well, you know, now that we don't know, when you can't assume
That's
ever.
true.
So.
All right. So we've got our non-binary friend here, who's not really a friend.
Not really a friend. Actually, they are kind of terrifying. But they are cleaning Wesley's wounds. And they say, like, you won't be able to break out. The chains are really thick. And Wes understands that he's about to be tortured, but he doesn't understand why his wounds are being cleaned. And the person says, well, they want you to be, like, nice and healthy for when they use the machine. So now we have this information about this mystery machine.
And we also had a little interesting back and forth between them because Wesley is like, I'm here till I die. And the cleaner says, till they kill you, yeah?
Yeah. So Wesley is in a torture chamber. And what happens next?
We cut to Buttercup in what I wrote down was a very pretty dress. And she actually wears it a couple of times.
It was. I thought
loved that
too,
dress.
yeah.
And you know what I really
one.
appreciated is that they had her wearing it on a couple of different days. Because you know what? Even a princess, she's not going to have a new outfit for every single day of her life. Sometimes you got to rewear it, especially if you know you look cute in it.
But no, I do have to say though, I was thinking about this like later. I was wondering like what the budget of this film was.
It doesn't seem to be very high.
It does not seem to be very high because like later in a scene, like when they're preparing for the wedding, the prince is like dressing her for the wedding. And I'm like, what, they just couldn't hire like another actress to like dress her? Like this doesn't seem very realistic.
Yeah.
And also she has like no family.
I'm going to be honest with you. I think that there's a lot of holes in this plot.
Oh,
and I think there's a lot of convenience moments where it's like, especially like a little bit later when he's like, oh, I wish we had a cloak. And he's like, oh, like this one, Max gave it to me. And it's like, okay, how convenient. So, I mean, this is very much a kid's movie and it's very much like a don't think about it too hard. Otherwise, you're going to start noticing that it's not the best.
Yes.
But it is kind of funny to watch it with a more critical eye as we're doing right now, just because, I mean, it would be interesting to experience it as an adult after watching it as a kid. So hopefully the people who are watching it again with us are kind of like, wow, I didn't think about this when I was watching it as a kid. So it's kind of funny.
Yes, agreed.
But anyway, so she's in her very pretty dress, but she is looking very sad. And she walks by and Prince Humperdinck is like, oh yeah, she's been really sad ever since the fire swamp. And he's like, you know, my father, the king, is in poor health, so she's just been really depressed about that. And at this point, Leah's like, on the couch next to me.
Yeah.
We know, Leah, we know.
Yep.
So then we find out that the king died that night and Buttercup and the prince are married by morning. And guess what happens? We're interrupted by the kid again.
Again, by this kid.
And this kid is acting like a little brat. And he's like, no, you're wrong because he doesn't marry her. Westley marries her. I'm sure of it. Stop reading it wrong, Grandpa. Which is so annoying. I hate this child.
So annoying. I hate him
He's
too.
such a little brat.
Too.
But the grandpa's like, you need to relax. I'm going to keep on reading the story, okay? And he's like, fine, but tell it right, Grandpa. Which, anyway. So back to the story. We see the prince. He is in a comically large crown. It is a massive crown. And he tells this whole story about his king dying. And he's like, I hope you love her as much as I have loved. And then you're going to have a very happy life. And then he's like, here's my queen, Buttercup. And then we see her emerge. And she has a comically large crown as well. And everyone's like bowing for her. And then this one person starts booing at her in the crowd. And she's like, boo, boo. And she starts heckling her so hard. And she's like, you found true love and you left him. You're such a loser. You're the princess of being an idiot and I hate you.
Yeah, she's like the queen of refuse, slime, filth, all that, yeah.
And I'm like, is this public knowledge? Because she's like, if I didn't agree to marry him, he would have killed Westley. And then she's like, so what? You're a slimy traitor, loser. Like, you're so dumb and ugly. Like, going on. I didn't write down what she said, obviously, but it was a lot. Then she wakes up. And I hate that. I hate when that happens in movies, when they wake up and it's like, oh, just kidding.
And they're like 10 days to the wedding and then the kid interrupts again. It was like, see, Grandpa, I told you. And then the grandpa was like, literally the grandpa said, can you shut up?
He's like, shut up and listen to the story.
And I was like, facts, Grandpa, facts. Tell this kid to shut up. I'm sick of him.
So then this next part is pretty funny. So Buttercup is basically going to the prince, and she's like, just so you know, I am in love with Westley. I want to be with him, which I did predict. And predictably, he's like not on board with it. And she's like, all right, then I'm just going to kill myself. And he's like, well, now wait a second. Don't do that. We'll call off the wedding and we'll ask Westley to come back. And here's the deal. So you write 4 letters, okay? 4 of the exact same letter. I'm going to send my 4 fastest ships. We're going to go in every direction. We're going to find the pirate. And if he wants to come back to you, he can. And if not, you have to marry me, okay? Because I am slightly better than suicide. He literally says that.
Yeah, he literally said that. I was like, wow, that was interesting.
So then what happens?
Then we see the prince and Rugen walking through the woods. I'm assuming they're going to where Wesley's being kept. And it turns out that Humperdinck hired Vizzini to kill Buttercup.
I think we should have had a gasp counter in this movie.
I literally was thinking
Leah
the exact same
was shook at this moment. When I tell you the horror as it dawned on Leah that he was planning on killing her, she was like, oh, no. I have to say, watching movies with Leah, very entertaining.
Oh, man. I did. I gasped
She's horrified.
pretty loud here. I was pretty shook. Well, because Humperdinck wants to start a war with Gilder. So now he says that since Vizzini failed, he now is going to strangle her on their wedding night.
Very romantic.
And then he also says, as they're walking through the woods, that the machine is going to start tonight. And Rugen asks if Humperdinck wants to watch, but he says he's too busy.
It was a very funny line.
Planning on getting married and killing his wife. It was a very funny line where he says, I'm just too busy planning on killing my wife. I can't be bothered to come watch this machine.
I can't do it right now. And he's like, well, you know what? You gotta rest. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything, which I loved.
So Rugen goes down into the pit of despair and he hooks up, or not him, but the cleaner hooks Westley up to the machine. Like, I kind of got the vibe that they looked like suction cups, but I was a little confused as to what it was going to be.
This is where I felt like the story was a little loose because there was like one random mention of magic in this movie. Well, I guess there was 2. Well, no, there was just the one, because I think the miracle wasn't really a miracle so much as it was like a revival.
The swamp, too. The swamp was, I guess, magical.
Was that magic?
I guess so. Like, all these fire spurts, like, coming out of the ground?
I mean, that happens in nature.
Does it?
Yeah, like geysers. Geysers?
Geysers. But those are water. Do fire geysers exist?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Quicksand exists. We know that.
Anyway, so he hooks him up to the machine. He turns it on, and water starts pouring out. It starts turning a wheel, and Wesley starts shaking in pain. And I literally wrote, I don't get it.
Yeah, I didn't understand exactly what was going on, but he did. He explained it, but then I was like,
I still didn't get it.
A really poor explanation, because he's basically like, we're on level 1, so I've taken 1 year of your life.
1 year of your life. Yeah. And then he says, you know, he wants to test how the machine is doing, and he wants to know how Westley feels. So he asks him how he feels, and Wesley just starts whimpering. So yeah, that was definitely confusing. Like, I thought it was a kind of weak thing, but I guess they couldn't have him being like
actually tortured
in like a kid's movie. So I guess that this was their, you know, cutesy fairy tale torture.
Yeah, this is what
device,
torture is like.
I suppose. Yeah, for sure. So.
Although I actually really felt bad for Westley when he was crying like that, because even level 1 really broke him. That was pretty sad. But I still don't like him.
Poor dude. I don't like him either.
So then we cut to the prince, and we have Yellen, who is the chief enforcer of Florin. So he gets information from the prince, and the prince is like, oh, there are some guys in the Thieves' Forest from Gilder who are trying to kill my future wife, the princess. So he wants the forest to be cleared out, and Yellen's like, ooh, that's gonna be kind of tough, and he's like, you gotta do it. You gotta clear it out. I will not let my wife be murdered.
Also, in that scene, Buttercup like briefly pops in and she's like, hey, have you heard from Westley yet? And he's like, nope, not yet. And she's like, chill, and she leaves.
Yeah, she honestly, for somebody who is very adamant about being with Westley, she doesn't really try too hard, but I guess there's not that much she can do, really. realistically.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then we cut to the Thieves' Forest, and everyone's being cleared out, except there is a Spaniard that is giving them trouble.
A Spaniard!
And we know who that is.
I think I gasped here too, probably.
You probably did. There's at least 10 gasps throughout this movie, which is less than 2 hours long. So, I mean, we're talking about a lot of gasping.
Yeah.
So, it is predictably Inigo, and he is very drunk, and he is yelling that Vizzini told him that he needs to come back to where it started, and he is not leaving this spot until Vizzini comes back. And someone tries to get him and pick him up, and he, like, starts swiping at him with his sword, and he's like, no, I'm not leaving. Vizzini's gonna meet me here. And then Fezzik comes for him, and it says he nurses him back to health, but I guess he's nursing him back to sobriety.
Yeah.
And he is explaining what's going on. Somehow he knows about the six-fingered man, Rugen.
Yeah, I was gonna say this was one of the plot holes. I think there were like a few times where what the narrator knows, all of a sudden all the characters know. And this was one of those moments where...
Like, Fezzik was definitely not there when
he was
this
not
happened.
there.
And how does he know that there are 30 men guarding? I guess he could have counted that.
He could have counted, yeah,
So yeah, he says that there are 30 men guarding, and Inigo's like, well, how many can you get? And he's like, honestly, maybe like 10. And Inigo takes a comically long time to count out on his fingers how many that leaves, and he's like, that's 20 for me. I don't think I can kill that many men at once. And then he's like, ugh, I need Vizzini to plan this. Like, I am just not smart enough to do this. And then he's like, wait, we can ask the man in black, who, as we know, is Westley. So then we cut back to, I believe it was a conversation with Yellen and the Prince Humperdinck. And he was saying that the Thieves' Forest emptied out, and he asked how many guards are there. Yellen replies that there are 30 people guarding. There's only one entrance. He's the only one who has the key. And the prince says, double the guards. We need 60 of them there. And then Buttercup strolls on in again because she can just come and go as she pleases, which is totally fine. And she's like, all right, what's the sitch? And he's like, oh, I guess Westley never came. That's fine, but we're going to get married tonight and everything's going to be great. And then all of my ships are going to escort us to, I didn't pick up where they were going.
Their honeymoon. I don't think they
Their
said.
honeymoon.
Yeah.
Okay. And then she's like, well, except for your 4 fastest, right? And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you said that you were going to send my 4 letters on your 4 fastest ships. And he's like, oh yeah, duh. Like, obviously I didn't mean those. And she's like, you never sent the ships, did you? Which we're all smacking our heads and being like, come on, you knew this.
Come on, Buttercup. She's not the smartest Buttercup in the Buttercup field.
No, that was terrible, but I'm going to allow it for now.
I'm so sorry.
So then she goes on this tirade and she is calling the prince a coward with a heart of fear.
A slimy weakling.
Yeah, she was really going off. She was kind of going off on him in the same way that her dream woman, well, not her dream woman, but the woman in her dream.
The woman in her dream.
was going off on her. And she's like, you can't hurt me because I'm in love, which, okay.
Yeah.
So then he locks her in a room. And I actually wrote down his anger at her and locking her in a room. I know he's going to kill her.
Did he lock her in a room or did he throw her out?
Oh, did he? All the doors look pretty much the same. They just filmed all of this in one hallway and keep on pretending that it's a bunch of different places.
It's a different room. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I assume that he just threw her out of his chambers.
Oh, yeah, maybe. But honestly, I think that's a little bit better than like pretending to backhand her. So I was like, you know what? You're a bad guy, but you're not as bad as Westley.
Until he actually murders her.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So then he pushes her out, whatever. He runs to the pit of despair and he's like, you know what? I'm going to have to murder you, to Westley. And then he puts the torture machine up to 50. And the 6-fingered man is like, no, you can't do 50. But he does. And it most definitely kills Westley.
And his screams now are being heard throughout the entire kingdom.
Yeah. The scream of, what did he say? Ultimate despair or something?
Inigo's like, I know the scream of despair. I heard it when my father died. And now I hear Westley screaming now. And I'm like, how does he know that that is Westley?
And he even says, like, it's because he's sad that the love of his life is marrying someone else. No, it's because he's dying.
But also, how does he know about Buttercup? He shouldn't know about that.
That I'll give it to him because I'm sure at this point the whole city probably knows.
You think?
Yeah, I mean, they're all attending the wedding flirting, aren't they?
Yeah, but how would he know that Buttercup and Westley were in love?
Oh, you're right.
As far as he knew, Westley was just trying to capture her. He didn't know that, like, they were in love.
You know what? You bring up a good point here.
I do bring up a good point. Then Fezzik and Inigo are going through the woods, and they run into the cleaner who was taking care of Westley. And they ask them, where is Westley? And they won't say. So Fezzik hits them on the head to try to, I guess, torture them into telling, but then they just end up pass out.
Yeah, and he's like, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah. And then this scene was like hilarious too, because Inigo kneels down and he starts like praying to his father, asking for his help to find Westley. And he asks him to guide his sword. So he closes his eyes, he sticks his sword out, and he's like running around the forest. And he runs into this tree. And then he dejectedly leans on the tree like, oh, it didn't work. But then the tree opens up and we know this is where the pit of despair is.
And this is another one of those like plot of convenience moments where I was like, it's a kid's movie, don't think too much about it, but come on.
And then they go down into the pit of despair and Wesley is dead on the table. And then our stinky little kid interrupts again. And he's like, Wesley can't be dead. How can he be dead? He's not dead. And then he's like,
we want Humperdinck to die.
Who's going to kill Humperdinck? You have to tell me. You have to tell me. And then Grandpa spoils the ending and tells us that Humperdinck doesn't die. And then the kid's like, so he wins? And he's like, let me just tell the story. And I'm like,
actually,
yeah, kid,
Grandpa
tell a story.
Is like, you know what? You're getting a little worked up. This is actually funny because this reminds me of when I was a kid and I would get like a little overwhelmed and my parents would be like, you're getting worked up. You need to go to bed now. And he's like, you're getting worked up. You're obviously taking this story way too seriously. You need to go to bed. And then he starts getting out. He's like, I'm going to leave. And the kid's like, wait, Grandpa, please. I'm sorry. Like, please just tell me what happens. And he's like, all right, fine. I'll tell you. But he's annoyed. And honestly, so am I. Because this kid needs to stop interrupting. Just let him tell you his story.
Yeah, I'm so done with this kid.
So
yeah.
Then we go back to the story and Inigo tells Fezzik to take the body because they are going to search for a miracle. And he's like, I hope you have money. And Fezzik's like, yeah, I have a little. So then they go to Miracle Max, which we find out that the king's son, Humperdinck, fired him because he used to work for the castle. And Inigo does remind Miracle Max that, and Miracle Max gets a little annoyed and he's like, thanks for that reminder, you jerk. And then he doesn't want to help, but he does end up letting them in, and he's looking at Wesley's body, and he basically is like, well, you gotta tell me what's going on, like, why are you doing this? And at first Inigo tells him this funny story where he's like, oh, his wife is crippled, his kids are on the brink of starvation, so like we need him back to life. And he's like, dude, that is not a good lie. You gotta try something better. And then Inigo tells him the truth, and he's like, you know what, actually I kind of liked your other story better, but anyway, do you have money? And they say they have $65 in whatever currency. I don't even think they made up a word for it.
No, they didn't even say dollars. They just said 65.
Yeah. They were like, let's not make this difficult. It's 65.
65, yeah.
65 coins, whatever. And he's like, ooh, I don't know if I'm willing to do it for that little unless it's something really, really noble. And so he's like, well, actually, Wesley isn't dead. He's mostly dead, which means he's still slightly alive. So he takes this thing. Leah is cracking up at this point because he has this big, I don't even know what it's called.
It's like the thing that you use to like stoke a fire, not stoke a fire, but you blow air into a fireplace with.
It's like it looks like an accordion, but it blows air, and he blew it into Wesley's body, and then he presses down on Wesley's body, and he's like, why do you need to be revived? And Wesley's like, true love.
And I'm like cracking up at this. That was so funny.
And then he's like, all right, I guess that's a noble cause. But actually, it sounded more like he said bluff, which sounds like bluff. So obviously he was playing a card game and he cheated. So I'm not going to revive him. And then we hear someone screaming, liar, liar. This part weirded me out so much.
This scene was so ridiculous. So ridiculous.
It was absurd. I was like, what is going on? This doesn't feel like the same movie. So this woman comes out. Max is screaming like, oh, witch, get away, get away. away. And she's like, I'm not a witch, I'm your wife, and you're a liar because you're scared to revive him, because you're scared that Humperdinck fired you and you're embarrassed that you can't commit miracles anymore and you're such a loser. And they're screaming back and forth, and it's really bizarre. It's honestly, I just wrote down bizarre fight ensues.
Pretty much.
And then Inigo kind of hears what's going on, and he's like, well, wait a second. If we revive him, he is going to steal Buttercup away from Humperdinck, which is going to be really embarrassing. And at that point, Miracle Max is like, now wait a second. I like that idea. So how embarrassed is he going to be? And Inigo's like, oh, he's going to be destroyed. It's going to be very humiliating for him. So then Max is like, all right, I'll help you out. So then him and his wife make this pill, and they coat it in chocolate, and it's a miracle pill. I didn't write down what the parameters were.
I don't remember either. It was like they had to wait 30 minutes and then he couldn't swim for like an hour.
Yeah, they said he couldn't swim for an hour, which I liked that. And they said something about like they need to wait 15 minutes for something for full potency.
Then they cut up to them sort of sneaking up to the front of the castle where the 30 guards are.
60 now.
Yes. At this point, Wes is still asleep. Fezzik realizes that there's more than 30 men, but Inigo says it's fine. Now that they have Westley, it'll be fine. So they give him the pill. They say, you know, how long will it take to kick in? He immediately wakes up, but he cannot move his body. And he kind of starts explaining the things that he needs. He says, we need a wheelbarrow, we need a cloak, we need a sword. And so their plan starts.
He's actually struggling a little bit because he's like, you're not really giving me much to work with here. And Inigo's like, well, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, I'm not the smart one. You're the smart one. I'm the one who's good with a sword, and Fezzik is big. So
Yeah.
please do something.
And he's saying, you know, like, your love is about to get married in a half an hour. So we got to stop it right now. It's do or die at this point.
And Wesley is flopping around comically at this point. Like, he cannot move his body, so he's just flopping around like a fish, and they're like kind of pulling him back and forth. So it is very apparent that even though his brain is working right now, his body is not.
His body is not working. But Inigo says, we got to do it now. I got to find Rugen, and you got to stop the wedding. And then we cut to preparations for the wedding, where apparently Buttercup cannot afford any sort of handmaiden. She is being dressed for her wedding by Prince Humperdinck.
Well, technically, he's accessorizing her.
He's accessorizing her, yes. But still, like, she's like sitting in a mirror getting ready, and he's helping her. And I'm like, this movie had a small budget.
But she also is like, oh, and by the way, Wes is still going to save me. And the prince is like, okay.
And then we cut to the wedding, and the priest says a speech that I've heard before as a joke in other shows, like the marriage is what brings us together. I've heard that before.
Oh, because you were cracking up, and I was like, is it his voice?
You thought it was Sacha Baron Cohen, which it totally is not. He's way too old.
I did pause for a second, and I was like, is that Sacha Baron Cohen? Because it sounds like him. Like, it sounds like one of his acts, you know?
Yeah, no, it totally did. But no, I was just laughing because I'd heard that before, and I didn't know what it was from when I had heard it. So
okay. Yeah, that guy, he was pretty funny. That's why I thought it was Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah, it seems like it could have been, but I just think age-wise, he's way too old.
Yeah.
And then back to the gate, Fezzik is standing in the wheelbarrow. He's got the cloak on.
Well, I don't think he's wearing it. I think it's in front of him.
Or it's in front of him, yeah.
Because they end up burning it.
They do end up burning it.
Which would be crazy if they just randomly killed Fezzik.
Kills Fezzik, yeah. But they're wheeling him up to the gate where the 60 men are, and he's like, I'm Dread Pirate Roberts, fear me, and all this stuff. And they're all getting scared, and then the cloak lights up on fire, and then all the men are running away scared, and Yellen's like, don't leave. And then Yellen's the only one left, and he's like trying to close the gate on them. And they end up getting through the gate. Fezzik can pull it up. The other guys run through, and they're on their way to save Buttercup and kill Rugen.
I don't know if this happens before or after, but at one point they cornered Yellen, and they were like, give us the keys. And he's like, I don't have the keys. And then Inigo's like, oh, Fezzik, why don't you rip his arms off? And then the guard's like, oh, these keys? I have them right here. Here you go.
Yeah. I forgot about that. Wow.
That was a good moment. You know, I think it's a little bit different doing all of this in one episode. So,
yeah.
I mean, we're bound to miss a couple of little details just because we don't want this to be like 5 hours long. So,
yeah, seriously.
if there are details that we are skipping over, please don't be upset. But you can yell at us on Twitter if you choose to.
You absolutely can. And this next sequence, I feel like there was a lot of skipping back and forth, like going to the wedding, saying that Buttercup saying that Wes is going to save her. And Humperdinck says, no, he's dead. I killed him. But she doesn't believe him. And she says, well, then why are you so nervous? And he's just trying to like rush the wedding along. And then the wedding ends and Westley didn't come.
Very suddenly.
And Buttercup's like, he didn't come.
And then she's just ready to commit suicide.
Yep, she's ready to... But to be fair, she was like stolen, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that sucks.
No, I mean, honestly, I get it. And there's really not much that she can do. But I do think it's kind of funny that she's just so forward about it. Like, she's being walked back to her chambers and she's with, I don't know who those two old people were.
I think that's got to be the king and queen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then, so she's like, you know, you've always been nice to me. So I just want to say goodbye before I commit suicide. And the guy's like, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. And he's like, she kissed me on the cheek. But before that, in these like intercutting scenes, we see Inigo run into Rugen and he says the line. He says, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And then Rugen runs away like a little nerd and he locks the door behind him. And Inigo's trying to like break through and he's like, Fezzik, you gotta help me. You gotta help me. And he's like, but I can't leave Wes behind. He like props him up and he's like, all right, I'll be right back.
Because Wes at this point still cannot move himself.
Yeah.
So he wraps Wes's arms around a coat of arms and he's like, just stay here. Which I thought is the most vulnerable spot he could possibly put him, with his back against everything so he could just get stabbed in the back, literally.
Yep. But Inigo does get through and he does get into a room with Rugen.
And then what immediately happens is he gets a knife thrown at his stomach. And he seems like he's pretty much going to die immediately.
I know I gasped really loud at this point.
You were horrified at this moment.
I was so scared.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, Rugen is like, wait a second, you're that Spaniard kid I remember. Oh man, did you spend your whole life searching for me to avenge yourself and now you're just gonna die? That's hilarious.
Yeah, he was so mean.
Which is really mean. Yeah, and Inigo's like, I'm sorry, father, I failed you.
That was really sad.
And then we actually had a really disgusting part, and this was what cemented my hatred for Westley.
Yep, same.
Because then we cut back to Buttercup, and she reaches the honeymoon suite, and she sits down at a desk. She has a really beautiful box. She opens it up. There's a knife in it. She levels it at her chest, and she's about to kill herself. And then we hear there's a shortage of perfect breasts in the world, so it would be a shame if you... I didn't write down...
If you ruin yours. I literally just wrote, he is on the bed, he says some creepy thing.
I think that if the love of my life was coming to save me and he said, like, nice boobies, you shouldn't hurt yourself.
Hey, don't kill yourself because I like your boobs.
I would be like, you know what? Actually, I'm out. Goodbye.
You know what? I decided you're not worth killing myself over.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
You know what? I'm going to live to spite you.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
But nope. Buttercup just jumps right on the bed and starts kissing him.
And I immediately wrote down, how did he get there? He was wrapped around that coat of arms. He clearly cannot move because, as we find out, he's still paralyzed.
I guess Fezzik walked him up there?
No, because Fezzik disappears.
Yeah, because then later they're like, where's Fezzik? And they're like, I thought he was with you. Yeah.
Yeah, so where is Fezzik? And how did he get there? That's another just gaping plot hole.
Yeah, but... After that annoying scene, we go back to Inigo, who pulls the knife out and he gets up and he's ready to duel. He doesn't care that his stomach is bleeding out. He's going to kill this guy that he came to kill. And then I loved this scene because he kept saying the line over and over again with more fervor every time he said it, you know? And he starts like kind of freaking Rugen out and he's like, stop saying it. But he's like, my name's Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And he gives him like two little stabs like in each shoulder. And then he slashes his cheeks the same way that he got his own cheeks slashed. And then he starts saying to him like, give me money, give me power. And Rugen says, I'll give you anything you want. And he says, I want my father. And then he kills him. And I was like, Inigo,
Good old Stabberoo.
yes, let's go.
Yeah, and then we're cutting back to Buttercup. She's hyped to see Westley for, honestly, I'm not really sure what reason, because he's not great. And she's like, I'm sorry for getting married. And Wesley, in typical jerk manner, is like, nope, you didn't. And she's like, no, I'm telling you I did. And he's like, no, actually, didn't happen. And she's like, can you just shut up and listen to me, because I did get married. And he's like, did you say I do? And she's like, no. And he's like, then it didn't happen.
But how would he even know that?
I know. That's the thing that annoyed me. He seems like the kind of person that would just hold his hands over his ears and be like, la, 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 I'm not listening to you.
I'm not listening. Yeah. I'm not listening.
Yeah. But I mean, it is true. And then he's like, isn't that right, Your Highness? And then the prince is there.
Yep.
And this part was actually great. I loved this line. As much as I didn't like Wes, I thought this was hilarious. So the prince was like, yeah, no, that's correct, but I'm going to fix that. Anyway, I'm going to kill you first, to the death. And Wesley's like, no, to the pain. And the prince is like, I'm going to be honest with you, I am not familiar with that phrase. Can you please explain? Which I thought was hilarious. I loved that for
That
honestly no reason. It was just funny that he's like, I'm not familiar with that phrase. Can you please?
He's like, can you please let me know what's going to happen to me? Thank you.
And then Wesley does this very detailed story about how he's going to dismember him. So he basically is like, first you'll lose your feet, then your legs, then your arms. And then the prince is like getting a little concerned, but he's also like, all right, get to the point. But he's like, basically, it means I will leave you in anguish, but I'm also going to keep your ears so that you can hear all the vile things people say about you when they find your dismembered body or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Super weird. And then he seems like he's bluffing at first, and he's like, well, I might be laying here because I am weak and I can't move, or I could be telling the truth. And then he stands up and he's like, drop your sword. And then the prince drops his sword.
Immediately.
Why? So I guess the bluff worked.
Yeah. And then when Inigo comes in, the prince is tied up and Wesley immediately falls over and the prince is like, see, I knew you were bluffing. I knew he was bluffing. Okay.
That was a pretty funny moment, but it was annoying that he just immediately dropped his sword.
I know, but he's a little baby. I just feel like he's not, he's not a swordsman.
Yeah, he's not. He's very cowardly, as we found out from Buttercup. And then Wesley is like, where's Fezzik? And Inigo's like, I don't know. And he's like, I thought he was with you. And then they hear Fezzik yelling and he's like, hey guys. So I went to the stables. I found these 4 horses and I was thinking, if we rescue the princess, there's going to be 4 of us and we have 4 horses. So I figured I'd grab them. Hey, princess. And she's like, hey.
And then she
that
jumps.
The most bizarre thing happens where she jumps out the window and just floats around for a while.
That was so weird.
So bizarre. And then he catches her. And Inigo is like, I've spent so much of my life seeking revenge, I don't actually know what to do with myself anymore. And Wesley is like, have you ever considered being a pirate? Because I feel like you would make a great Dread Pirate Roberts.
Which I love for Inigo. I love that for him.
Yeah, that is cute. And I love the idea of him being a pirate. He's got the vibe for it. Yeah. And then Grandpa interrupts again and he's like, you know what? I'm just going to end the story here. And the kid's like, wait, why? And Grandpa says, because there's kissing and I know you're not into that. And the kid's like, it's okay, Grandpa, you can tell me. And then they have a passionate kiss. I didn't write down how it was described because I was annoyed that Wesley ended up getting the girl, even though I knew it was going to happen.
It was something like, there are 5 kisses that are the best kisses.
Are the most passionate in the world. And this kiss left them all in the dust or something like that. Yeah. And then it's time for the kid to go to bed because the story has officially ended on that passionate kiss. And Grandpa's getting ready to leave and the kid's like, Grandpa, maybe you can read it to me tomorrow again too. And the grandpa says, as you wish.
As you wish.
And thus ends The Princess Bride.
Yay, we did it.
So we have officially watched the movie. Now, I would like to know, I know this was a very condensed version, and as condensed as it was, this is going to be a long episode. But
Yeah,
what
for sure.
did you think of the movie overall?
I did enjoy it. It's not, I would say, like my favorite genre because it for sure was geared more towards kids. And I am more of a blood, guts, gore kind of person when it comes to this
You
sort
sure
of
are.
film. And it was like a little bit, lighter, but that's what we were going for. I did like it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would seek it out again. I didn't like the love story for
That's fair.
sure. Did not like the love story, but one character I feel like does have my heart, and I am upset that he wasn't the love interest, and that is my boy Inigo. I loved him.
That was your favorite character?
That was my favorite character. Who was yours? Was it Buttercup?
Oh, Fezzik.
Oh, well, that's a good second. Yeah, no, Inigo was my favorite. I loved Fezzik too, though, but the two of them, I want it to be their story.
Fezzik was the best. Inigo at the end was like, Fezzik, you're the best. And Fezzik's like, don't worry, I won't let it get in my head. And I'm like, Fezzik, you're literally the best. Let it get to your head. You are the best character in this movie.
No, I think it does track that Fezzik would be your favorite and Inigo would be my favorite.
You know what? Actually, you're right.
But I just wish it was their story. Like, I just wish it was about them.
Okay, no, I'm going to have to stop you right there. The love story was the best part of this movie, although I didn't personally like Westley, and I think he could have been a better character. I really enjoy romance stories, unlike you, and I loved that that was the center of this story.
No, I do like romance, but I just don't like misogynistic men.
No, I think that's fair. I wasn't a fan of him, but I will say, if I watched this as a kid, as a preteen, I would have been all over it. I would have watched it every night. I would have been in love with Westley. I know myself pretty well, and I know I would have loved and lived for this movie because I do love the romance. It's just now as an adult, I can look and say, like, this is a not great guy.
Yeah, he's a little slimy. And you just have to hope, like, kids watching this that, like, that sort of stuff is going over their heads, I'm hoping.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that it is.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like a lot of the movies that I think back to and enjoyed as a kid probably didn't age the best.
Yeah.
So I give it a pass for that because I do think that, like, there's a lot of stuff that is going to be missed.
Yeah,
and I
for
also
sure.
think for me as a person who enjoys romance, it's a tough line to walk because I think on the one hand, it is fiction and you have to understand that and accept, like, this isn't a real life situation. But on the other hand, we don't really want to be promoting bad things. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a tough line to walk.
You know what's something else I was thinking too, and I'm actually curious about this from our listeners. I feel like if I had watched this as a kid and then I rewatched it as an adult, I would have completely forgot about the grandpa child in it. I would have completely forgot that they
yeah.
were a part of it. That was probably the worst part.
I was wondering if the As You Wish was meant to be like, oh, by the way, I'm secretly Westley.
No, I think it was supposed to say I love you.
Ah, okay. Okay. Well, I guess I'm not that good of a film major.
I mean, I think our predictions were decent.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not that much to go off of.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do think it was a fun movie. I think this was a fun little fluff piece. And this is something that we're just going to be doing in between seasons. We're not switching over to It's All Romance to me. Don't worry. But we are going to be jumping straight into the next season, which is Star Wars. I am not going to spoil anything right now. I know a few of you have been asking what order we're going to watch it in, all that sort of stuff. We're going to save that for next week. So come back next week. We will be here on Thursday. We will share with you what I know about Star Wars. Leah will share a little bit more about her experience as a Star Wars fan, and we'll just dive in. It's going to be a fun one. It's probably going to be about the same amount of episodes as Lord of the Rings. I know some people were worried that it was going to be like a 50 episode affair. Don't worry. We're going to make it work out pretty nicely. So definitely come back next week.
For sure. And next week is going to work the same way that we started the Lord of the Rings season, where we just had an episode 0 talking about the films. And then for episode 1, we will dive into the films.
Yeah. So see you next week. Thank you guys so much for joining this special bonus episode.
Yes, it was fun.
And if you're not already following us on Twitter, that is where we are going to be posting our polls. You can also talk to us during the seasons, of course, but in between seasons, we think it would be fun to do just a little movie interlude like this for random movies. So if you have a movie recommendation, just hit us up on Twitter at All Geek Podcast.
And yeah, thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the It's All Geek to Me podcast, hosted by Leah and Kelli. Make sure to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast player and give us a rating. You can also find us on Twitter at All Geek Podcast. New episodes drop every Thursday. See you next week.